Hello, this is Arielle, the Inconspicuous Bear, and I'll be narrating the 10-man version of the Heroic Galakras encounter in the Siege of Orgrimmar from a Guardian point of view. If you've tanked Galakras before on Normal, you'll quickly realize that this encounter on Heroic is basically exactly the same. There are no new tanking mechanics. The only difference is the amount of incoming damage is going to be significantly higher than it was on Normal mode. Otherwise, everything is exactly the same. The only new mechanic is for DPS only, so you don't have to worry about it at all. Since this encounter is basically the same, I'm not going to re-explain any of the normal mode mechanics that persist into Heroic. Instead, if you want a rundown of those, go ahead and check out the normal mode guide, which you can find a link to in the top right hand corner of this video. Since there are no new mechanics to discuss, we'll just jump straight to the tanking items portion of this video. You'll want to use the DPS cloak, because basically 2/3 of this encounter is purely trash, where you'll have multiple mobs, varying between 3 and 5, sometimes up to even 6 mobs coming at you at once. So obviously the clear damage there is going to be really useful for getting those down as quickly as possible. And for Galakras herself, I think the incoming damage is pretty pitiful. So unless you take a lot of stacks of the dot, in which case the tanking cloak isn't going to help you anyway. So you just basically want to run with the DPS cloak for the entire thing. And of course, as usual, take the tanking metagem, because the damage reduction is actually pretty helpful, especially if you end up taking a lot of stacks of the dot from Galakras at the end. Your talent choices will pretty much depend on whether or not you're tanking the towers. For the first tier, you will take Feline Swiftness, because there's no reason to take anything else if you're going to be on the ground the entire time, whereas if you're going to be on the top, you'll want Wild Charge, just in case you're dumb enough to get knocked off of the tower, in which case you can just charge back onto it. For the second tier, you take Ysera's Gift, because Renewal is worthless, and because it's too difficult to use Scenario Ward to any useful effect anymore in Siege of Orgrimmar. Tier 3, you take Typhoon. Doesn't really matter whether you're doing up or down on this, because A, it's a secondary interrupt, and B, it knocks the Bone Crackers out of their Fracture ability, which is pretty useful, considering that if you let one of the NPCs die, which is basically impossible if you know what you're doing, then you lose the encounter, obviously. Tier 4, Incarnation. You could take Soul of the Forest, I guess. But Incarnation is just better DPS overall anyway, especially when you time it with when you have high amounts of engines. Tier 5, take Mighty Bash, for the exact same reason you take Typhoon, secondary interrupt, and for knocking Bone Crackers out of Fracture. And then Tier 6, you could take Heart of the Wild or Nature's Vigil. You can only really use Heart of the Wild at the either at the very start of the encounter, when you're going to trash packs and both tanks are there, or at the very, very end when you are not currently tanking the boss. I personally prefer to use Nature's Vigil here because of the sheer amount of use you can get out of it. And if you're two-healing this, it's very possible that someone can get caught without some heals for a short amount of time, with the propensity of Drakefire to just randomly hit someone 3 times because they're dicks. That's why I like Nature's Vigil, and it combines well with Berserk and Incarnation, obviously. For tank-specific things to think about, the only thing that's really specific to a tank, per se, is when you're preparing to go up into the towers. You can actually pull the Grunt and the 2 archers, sharpshooters, whatever they're called, out of the base of the tower, and tank them within range of the tower, so that they don't get rubber banded back inside, but outside the tower, so that your ranged DPS can still kill them. And since this will be done while the demo is still shooting them, you'll get stunned fairly often. However, it will give your DPS a lot of time to sit there and kill the ads, whereas otherwise they would just be doing nothing. So that's something to think about. You basically don't take any damage, but it allows you to get more DPS time on useful targets. So that's a good thing. The only Guardian-specific things to think about are, if you're doing towers and you get knocked off, obviously Wild Charge back on. You could take Feline Swiftness and just try and use Skull Bash effectively to do that. However, timing Skull Bash as a charge is a lot more difficult than simply spamming your charge button if you get knocked off. So bear that in mind if you make that choice. Otherwise, it's about timing cooldowns effectively. If you're going to be tanking Galakras first, you're going to make sure that you want to have an Incarnation and Nature's Vigil up for when that happens, and your second potion. So time your cooldowns with that in mind. If you're going to be taking Galakras first or second, you obviously have to pay attention to that too. Otherwise, Berserk, when I use Berserk, I use it for the first mini-boss with her 2 ads, because it's obviously a perfect time to use Berserk and Nature's Vigil together for large amounts of DPS. And the second time I use Berserk is usually on, I think it's the second mini-boss. I don't really remember off the top of my head. So either the second mini-boss or the trash wave immediately following the second mini-boss. Use Berserk there as well. As for Incarnation, just try and use it as long as you know that you're going to be having it up for Galakras. Obviously, if you're doing towers, it's a perfect time to use Berserk, or use Incarnation rather. Otherwise, it's at your discretion based on how difficult the waves are for your particular raid team. One additional thing to remember as a druid is that you also still have the spell called Tranquility. When you're not actually tanking the boss, I find it very useful to actually use Tranquility for the Pulsing Flames, or at least one of the Pulsing Flames, because it can pretty much almost completely negate it. Even if you don't combine it with Heart of the Wild, it's still useful at doing that. So just kind of keep that in mind and communicate with your healers when you want to use Tranquility between when you are and are not tanking in order to drop stacks. Thanks for watching this video, and unfortunately I'm going to have to leave you in complete silence for the rest of it because I made the mistake of recording this with music on, and since I don't want copyright strikes, you get silence. My bad.